The marble floors of Ashford Manor stretched endlessly before Elena as she scrubbed on her hands and knees. Her uniform was plain and worn, her hair tied back in a simple bun. At 32 years old, she looked like any other housemaid except for one thing. Her hands were different. They were delicate, with long fingers that seemed out of place gripping a dirty mop. "Hey, new girl," Rita called from across the hall. She was one of the senior maids, the type who loved to gossip. "Where'd you learn to talk like that? You sound like you went to some fancy school." Elena kept her eyes down. "Just here and there," she mumbled, continuing to scrub. Rita wasn't satisfied. "Here and there. Come on. You've been working here for 3 months and barely said 2 words to anyone. What are you hiding?" Before Elena could respond, Sophie, the youngest maid, rushed past carrying fresh linens. "Leave her alone, Rita. Maybe she just likes to keep to herself." Rita rolled her eyes. "Whatever. She's weird, that's all I'm saying." Elena was grateful when they finally left. She finished the floor and moved to the next room, carefully avoiding the music room. She always avoided that room. The grand piano sitting there was like a ghost she couldn't face, but today was different. Mrs. Ashford, the owner of the manor, had left the music room door wide open. As Elena walked past, she couldn't help but glance inside. The piano sat there, magnificent and intimidating, its black surface gleaming under the chandelier light. Her chest tightened. Her hands began to shake. 5 years ago, everything was different. 5 years ago, Elena's life was a dream that most people could only imagine. Back then, she wasn't Elena the maid. She was Elena Winters, the pianist everyone was talking about. At 27, she had just won the International Chopin competition in Warsaw, the biggest achievement a classical pianist could hope for. Newspapers called her the voice of a generation. Music magazines put her face on their covers. Concert halls from New York to Tokyo were fighting to book her performances. She remembered walking into those concert halls wearing elegant gowns, her heart racing with excitement rather than fear. The applause would wash over her like a wave, and when she sat at the piano, the whole world disappeared. It was just her and the music. Nothing else mattered. She lived in a beautiful apartment in the city with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. Her fiancé, Daniel, was a successful conductor. They were the perfect couple in the classical music world. Everyone said they were going places. Her mother was her biggest cheerleader. Maria Winters had been the one who first put Elena's tiny hands on piano keys when she was just 4 years old. She was a piano teacher herself, not famous but deeply knowledgeable. Every success Elena achieved, her mother celebrated like it was her own. "You were born to share beauty with the world," her mother would say. Tears in her eyes after every performance. Then came the night that destroyed everything. Carnegie Hall, the most prestigious venue in America. Elena was scheduled to perform a program of Chopin and Rachmaninoff. It was supposed to be her crowning moment, the performance that would cement her place in music history. Tickets had sold out in hours. Critics flew in from around the world. The pressure was enormous, but Elena felt ready. 3 hours before the performance, she got the call. Her mother had collapsed at home. Heart attack. By the time Elena reached the hospital, it was too late. Her mother was gone. Elena remembered falling to her knees in that sterile hospital hallway, unable to breathe, unable to think. The woman who had given her music, who had believed in her before anyone else did, was simply gone. Her management team found her there. They were sympathetic but firm. The show must go on. Thousands of people had paid for tickets. The critics were already seated. Canceling would destroy her reputation and cost hundreds of thousands in penalties. They convinced her that her mother would have wanted her to perform, so Elena went. She put on her gown. She walked onto that stage, and she fell apart. She sat at the piano, her hands positioned over the keys, and suddenly she couldn't move. The notes on the sheet music blurred. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might die right there on stage. Her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't control them. The audience waited. The silence grew uncomfortable, and then Elena stood up and ran off the stage. The panic attack lasted for hours, but the damage to her career happened much faster. By morning, the reviews were vicious, unprofessional, unreliable, a waste of talent. Some critics were sympathetic about her loss, but most focused on the scandal. The pianist who ran away, the star who couldn't handle pressure. Daniel, her fiancé, couldn't deal with it. His own career was taking off, and being associated with her breakdown was bad for his image. He broke off the engagement 2 weeks after her mother's funeral. She barely noticed. She was too numb to care. The concert cancellations started immediately. Venues didn't want to risk booking someone who might not show up. Her management dropped her, citing breach of contract. The financial penalties from Carnegie Hall alone were crushing. Without income and with mounting debts, Elena lost her apartment. But the worst part was the piano itself. Every time she tried to sit down and play, even in private, she would have another panic attack. Her hands would freeze. The memory of her mother's death and that horrible night on stage would come flooding back. The thing she loved most in the world, the thing that had defined her entire life, had become her biggest source of pain. Within 6 months, Elena Winters had disappeared. She changed her appearance, started using her middle name, and found work doing the only thing she could manage: cleaning. It required no creativity, no performance, no risk of failure. She could disappear into the work and try to forget who she used to be. Now, standing in the doorway of the music room at Ashford Manor, Elena stared at the grand piano. She hadn't touched one in 5 years. Sometimes, late at night, her fingers would move on her pillow, practicing pieces she once knew by heart. But actually playing, that was impossible. She turned away quickly, her heart pounding, and went back to scrubbing floors. It was safer this way, invisible, unknown, safe from judgment and expectation. If only she could have stayed invisible forever. But fate had other plans, and they would begin with a party she was about to serve. The announcement came during breakfast in the servants' hall. Mrs. Ashford was hosting a charity gala, and the entire staff would be working overtime to prepare. Elena's stomach dropped. Large events meant more people, more attention, more chances of someone recognizing her. "This is the biggest event of the season," Mrs. Palmer, the head housekeeper, announced sternly. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. "Mrs. Ashford has invited over 100 guests. We will be serving dinner, and there will be a special musical performance." Elena's hands gripped her coffee cup tighter. "A famous pianist is coming," Mrs. Palmer continued, her voice filled with pride. "Mr. Vincent Cross, very distinguished. Very important. You will all be on your absolute best behavior." The name meant nothing to most of the staff, but Elena knew it. Vincent Cross was arrogant and talented in equal measure. She'd met him briefly years ago at a competition. He'd been dismissive of everyone, treating other musicians like they were beneath him. Over the next 2 weeks, the manor became a whirlwind of activity. Elena scrubbed, polished, and prepared alongside everyone else. Mrs. Ashford seemed particularly cruel during this time, as if the stress of the event made her take pleasure in making the staff miserable. "You there," Mrs. Ashford snapped at Elena one afternoon. "Those windows are still streaky. Do them again, and this time try to do something right for once." Rita smirked from across the room. She'd grown even more hostile toward Elena, as if Elena's quiet nature was a personal insult. "Some people just aren't cut out for this work," Rita said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Elena said nothing. She never did. She just picked up her cleaning supplies and started over. The night before the gala, Vincent Cross arrived early to inspect the piano. Elena was carrying fresh towels through the hallway when she heard his voice from the music room. "This is completely unacceptable," he was saying, his tone sharp and entitled. "This piano needs to be tuned again. I will not perform on an instrument that isn't absolutely perfect." "Of course, Mr. Cross." Mrs. Ashford's voice was syrupy sweet, so different from how she spoke to her staff. "We'll have the tuner come back immediately." Elena tried to slip past the door unnoticed, but Vincent spotted her. "You," he called out. "Bring me some tea. Earl Grey, not too hot, and use a clean cup, obviously." She nodded and went to the kitchen. When she returned with the tea on a silver tray, her hands were steady despite her racing heart. She placed it on the table beside him. Vincent picked up the cup, examined it dramatically under the light, then made a show of wiping the rim with his handkerchief before taking a sip. "One can never be too careful," he said, looking directly at Elena with a condescending smile. Mrs. Ashford laughed, a fake tinkling sound. Rita and another maid who were dusting nearby giggled too. Elena felt her face burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned to hide her feelings well over the past 5 years. "That will be all." Vincent dismissed her with a wave of his hand, as if she were an annoying insect. Elena left the room, her jaw clenched. She remembered a time when musicians like Vincent would have fought for a chance to speak with her, to collaborate, to simply be in her presence. Now she was invisible to him. Less than invisible. She was just help. The night of the gala arrived. The manor was transformed with flowers, candles, and elegant decorations. Women in designer gowns and men in expensive suits began arriving in luxury cars. Elena and the other maids wore their uniforms, though Mrs. Ashford had deliberately ordered Elena's a size too small. It was uncomfortable and humiliating, which was exactly the point. "You look ridiculous," Rita whispered as they lined up to serve. "Why is yours so tight? Didn't you ask for the right size?" Elena knew Rita was aware of what had happened, but she said nothing. What was the point? The evening began with cocktails in the main hall. Elena circulated with a tray of champagne glasses, keeping her head down. She overheard fragments of conversations about stock markets, vacation homes, and charitable donations that were clearly more about tax benefits than actual charity. "Darling, did you see the Rothstein collection last week?" One woman said to another. "Oh, absolutely dreadful. No taste whatsoever. They treated the serving staff like furniture, talking freely as if the maids couldn't hear or didn't matter. One older man actually snapped his fingers at Elena to get her attention, like she was a dog. She walked over with the tray, her face expressionless. During dinner, Elena served from the sidelines, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. She tried not to look at the music room visible through the open doors where the grand piano waited like a patient predator. After dinner, the guests moved to the music room for the performance. The staff lined up along the back wall to watch, as Mrs. Ashford liked having them present to serve any additional requests. Elena wanted to leave to find any excuse to be somewhere else, but Mrs. Palmer's sharp eyes were watching everyone. Vincent took his place at the piano with theatrical flair. He adjusted the bench twice, flexed his fingers dramatically, and then began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most famous and difficult pieces in classical repertoire. Technically, he was flawless. Every note was perfect, every run precise. But something was missing. There was no soul in it, no emotion. He was playing to impress, not to move. It was music as a performance of ego rather than a sharing of beauty. The guests applauded enthusiastically when he finished, but Elena could tell most of them didn't actually understand what they'd heard. They were clapping for his reputation, not his artistry. "Magnificent," Mrs. Ashford gushed, standing to lead the applause. "Absolutely magnificent. We are so fortunate to have such a distinguished artist in our humble home." Vincent stood and bowed, soaking in the praise. Thank you. Though I must say true artistry is becoming quite rare these days. So few people have the discipline and talent required." He accepted a glass of whiskey and continued talking, his voice growing louder with each drink. "Most people think they can just sit down and play. They have no idea the years of dedication it requires. The sacrifice." Elena felt something twist in her chest. Sacrifice. What did he know about sacrifice? "In fact," Vincent continued, his words starting to slur slightly, "I'd wager that no one in this room, apart from myself, could even play a simple scale properly. Real talent is that rare." The guests laughed, enjoying his boldness. Mrs. Ashford looked slightly offended but kept smiling. Then Vincent's eyes swept across the room and landed on the staff lined against the wall. A cruel smile crossed his face. "Let's test that theory, shall we?" Elena's blood ran cold. "You there?" Vincent pointed directly at her. "The maid who keeps staring at my piano. You seem fascinated. Why don't you come play something for us?" The room erupted in laughter. Mrs. Ashford clapped her hands together delightedly. "Oh, what fun. Yes, come on then, girl. Let's see if you can manage chopsticks." Elena shook her head. I can't, ma'am. I need to serve." "Nonsense," Vincent said, walking toward her. "I insist. Unless you're scared? Can't even play a single note?" The other guests were loving the entertainment. Rita and the other maids were whispering excitedly, some looking eager to see her humiliated. Only Sophie, standing at the far end of the line, looked worried. "She doesn't have to," Sophie said quietly, but no one paid attention to her. "Play or you're dismissed," Mrs. Ashford said suddenly, her voice cold. Without a reference. "Let's see what you're really worth." Elena's world tilted. Without a reference, she couldn't get another job. She'd be out on the street, And yet the thought of touching that piano, of facing those memories, filled her with terror. But she had no choice. On trembling legs, Elena walked toward the piano. The guests parted for her, amused and curious. Vincent leaned against the wall with a smug expression, enjoying his little game. Elena sat down at the bench. The familiar position felt like coming home and walking into a nightmare at the same time. Her hands hovered over the keys, shaking visibly. The room waited. Some guests were smiling. Others were already losing interest, reaching for their phones. Elena closed her eyes. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear her mother's voice from years ago. Music isn't about perfection, Elena, it's about truth. She took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes came out hesitant and shaky. Elena's fingers felt stiff, like they'd forgotten what to do. She started playing Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, the first piece her mother had taught her when she was 15. For a moment, it seemed like Vincent's cruel joke would work. She sounded rusty, unpracticed, like someone who'd taken a few lessons years ago. Vincent smirked and looked at the guests with an "I told you so" expression. Mrs. Ashford covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Rita whispered something to another maid, both of them grinning. But then something shifted. Elena's muscles remembered what her mind had tried to forget. 5 years of avoiding the piano meant nothing to hands that had trained for over 20 years. The hesitation melted away, and suddenly the music began to flow. Not just flow, it soared. The notes became pure and clear, each one perfectly placed. But it wasn't just technical skill. There was something else in the music: pain, loss, longing. Every emotion Elena had buried for 5 years came pouring out through her fingers. The Nocturne, already a melancholic piece, became something heartbreaking and beautiful. The room fell completely silent. The guests who'd been checking their phones looked up. The ones who'd been whispering stopped mid-sentence. Even the other maids stood frozen, their mouths slightly open. Vincent's smirk disappeared. His face went pale. He straightened up from the wall, his eyes wide. Elena wasn't thinking anymore. She was lost in the music, in the memory of her mother sitting beside her on a piano bench in their old apartment, guiding her hands, explaining how to make each phrase sing. Tears ran down Elena's cheeks. But she didn't stop playing. She couldn't stop. She transitioned seamlessly into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was bold, powerful, technically demanding, but more than that, it was deeply emotional. This wasn't the same Rachmaninoff that Vincent had played earlier. His version had been perfect but cold, like looking at a beautiful statue. Elena's version was alive. It breathed. It felt. Several guests had tears in their eyes. One elderly woman clutched her husband's arm, visibly moved. Mrs. Ashford's expression had changed from amusement to confusion to something like fear. Sophie was crying openly, her hands pressed to her mouth. When Elena played the final chord, she held it, letting it fade naturally into silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Vincent stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the spell. His hands were shaking. His face had gone from pale to red. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying in the silent room. No, you can't be." He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling. He searched for something, then looked up at Elena, then back at his phone. His eyes went wide. "You're Elena Winters," he said, and the name dropped into the room like a bomb. The Elena Winters. The one who won the Chopin competition. The one who disappeared after Carnegie Hall. The room erupted. Guests started pulling out their phones, frantically searching. The name Elena Winters was typed into dozens of search engines simultaneously. Within seconds, they were comparing old photos to the woman sitting at the piano. "Oh my God, it is her," someone said. "I thought she was dead," another guest whispered. "No, I heard she'd moved to Europe. She just vanished. Nobody knew what happened to her." Mrs. Ashford's face had turned bright red. She looked furious and humiliated at the same time. She'd been treating a former international celebrity like dirt for months. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "She's been lying to us. She's been working here under a false name." "What name did you use?" Vincent asked Elena, his voice gentler now but still shocked. "Eleanor Reed," she said quietly. Reed was her mother's maiden name. "I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I needed to disappear." Rita looked like she might faint. Her face had gone completely white. All those cruel comments, all that mockery suddenly played back in her mind. The other maids looked equally horrified. An older gentleman with silver hair stepped forward from the crowd. He'd been one of the few crying during Elena's performance. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Robert Castellano. I conduct the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra." Elena recognized the name. Everyone in classical music knew Robert Castellano. He was a legend. "I was there that night," he continued. "At Carnegie Hall, I was in the third row." Elena's chest tightened. That night. Of course, someone here had been there for her greatest humiliation, but Robert surprised her. His eyes were wet with tears. "We failed you," he said. "The whole music community failed you. You just lost your mother. You were grieving. And we expected you to perform anyway. We judged you for being human, for having limits, for breaking under unbearable pressure." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I've thought about that night many times over the years. I've wondered where you went, if you were okay. And now hearing you play just now, Miss Winters, that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in decades. That wasn't just technique. That was art, that was real." Other guests murmured in agreement. Many of them looked ashamed, as if they were personally responsible for what had happened 5 years ago. Vincent approached Elena slowly. He looked different now, humbled and small. "I was there too," he admitted. "At Carnegie Hall. I was backstage waiting to meet you after your performance. When you ran off stage, I remember thinking you were weak, that you'd let everyone down." He paused, struggling with his words. "I was wrong. I've been playing piano for 30 years, and I've never put as much truth into my music as you just did in 5 minutes. I've been chasing fame and recognition for so long I forgot why I started playing in the first place." Vincent looked at the guests, at his empty whiskey glass, at the piano. "I need to step back. I need to remember what music is actually for. It's not about showing off. It's not about being perfect. It's about—" He gestured helplessly at Elena. "It's about that." What she just did. Mrs. Palmer, the head housekeeper, had been standing in the doorway. She looked absolutely stricken. She walked forward slowly. "Miss Winters, Elena, I had no idea. The way I've spoken to you, the tasks I've given you." She couldn't finish the sentence. Mrs. Ashford, however, was a different story. Her humiliation was turning into anger. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. "You've been deceiving us all, working under false pretenses. I could sue you for fraud." "For what?" Robert Castellano said sharply, turning to face her. "For working honestly under her mother's maiden name? For not announcing her past? She cleaned your house. She did her job. The only fraud here is how you've treated another human being." Several guests nodded in agreement. Mrs. Ashford realized she was losing the room. Her social standing, the very thing she cared about most, was crumbling. "Get out," she said to Elena, her voice tight and controlled. "Get out of my house!" "You're fired," Catherine, one of the guests, said disapprovingly. "I said get out." Mrs. Ashford's voice rose, hysterical now. Elena stood from the piano bench. She was shaking, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. 5 years of hiding destroyed in 15 minutes. Robert stepped forward. "Miss Winters, please. Before you go, may I have your contact information? I'd like to speak with you about the future, about music." Elena hesitated, then nodded. Sophie rushed forward with a piece of paper and pen. Elena wrote down her number. "I'll call you tomorrow," Robert promised. "We have much to discuss." As Elena walked toward the door to get her things, Sophie followed her. "Elena," she said quietly, using her real name for the first time. "I knew you were special. I didn't know how, but I knew. Thank you for what you just did. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to fail, to fall, to lose everything, and still have something beautiful inside you." Elena hugged the young girl, tears streaming down both their faces. She left Ashford Manor that night with nothing but a small bag of belongings and a phone number from a famous conductor. The video of her performance, recorded by dozens of phones, was already spreading across the internet. By morning, everything would change again. Elena woke up in her tiny apartment the next morning to her phone buzzing constantly. She'd barely slept. The events of the previous night kept replaying in her mind. The feeling of her fingers on the keys, the look on Vincent's face, the way the room had gone silent. She picked up her phone and her stomach dropped. There were hundreds of notifications, messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, friend requests from strangers, missed calls from unknown numbers. She opened social media and froze. The video was everywhere. Someone had titled it, "The Maid Who Shocked Everyone," and it had already been viewed millions of times. The comment section was exploding. "I'm literally crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. This is what real talent looks like. Not these fake influencers." I looked her up. She was famous 5 years ago and disappeared. This is insane. The way that arrogant pianist's face changed, priceless. But there were negative comments too. She should have told them who she was. She was basically lying. Some people thought the whole thing was staged. Others criticized her for hiding her talents instead of using them. Elena put the phone down, her hand shaking. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. The attention. The judgment. People picking apart her choices in her life. There was a knock at her door. Elena jumped, her heart racing. Nobody ever visited her here. She opened the door cautiously to find Sophie standing there, out of breath. "Sophie, how did you find my address?" "From the employment files," Sophie admitted, looking guilty. "I'm sorry, but I had to see you. The manor is chaos this morning. Absolute chaos." Sophie came inside and collapsed onto Elena's worn couch. "Mrs. Ashford is furious. She's been on the phone all morning trying to control the damage. Some guests are saying horrible things about how she treated you. Her reputation is taking a hit." Elena felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. "I never wanted that." "Well, you didn't do anything wrong," Sophie said firmly. "She did. Rita is completely devastated, by the way. She can't stop crying. She keeps saying she can't believe how cruel she was to you. Mrs. Palmer, too. She's talking about quitting because she's so ashamed." Elena sat down slowly. She'd never considered how her revelation would affect the other staff members. They'd been unkind, yes, but they hadn't known who she was. They'd just treated her like they might treat any new maid who seemed different. "There's something else," Sophie said. "Vincent Cross posted a video this morning. Have you seen it?" Elena shook her head. Sophie pulled out her phone and showed her. Vincent was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, his face bare of the arrogance he'd worn the night before. He looked tired and real. "I want to apologize," Vincent said in the video. "Last night I humiliated someone for my own entertainment. I treated a fellow musician, a fellow human being, with cruelty and disrespect." Elena Winters showed more artistry in 5 minutes than I've shown in my entire career. She reminded me what music is supposed to be about. It's not about ego. It's not about showing off. It's about truth and emotion and connecting with people. He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm canceling my upcoming performances. I need to step back and rediscover why I started playing music. I became so focused on fame and recognition that I lost sight of the art itself. Thank you, Elena, for that painful but necessary lesson." The video had over 2 million views. The comments were mixed. Some people praised Vincent for his honesty. Others said he was only apologizing because he got caught. Some thought he was just trying to get attention. "At least he's trying," Sophie said quietly. Elena's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it. "Miss Winters? This is Robert Castellano. I hope I'm not calling too early." Elena's heart jumped. "No, not at all. I've been up all night thinking about your performance," Robert said, his voice warm and excited. "Elena, I want to offer you something, but I need you to know there's absolutely no pressure. You can say no and I'll completely understand." "What is it?" "I'd like to organize a small concert. Very intimate, maybe 60 or 70 people. Hand-picked audience. People who love music for music's sake, not for social status. No press unless you want it. Just a chance for you to play again, on your own terms." Elena's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can." "Take your time to think about it," Robert said gently. "But Elena, what you did last night wasn't just playing piano. You reminded everyone in that room why music matters. That's a gift. The world needs that gift, but only if you're ready to share it." After she hung up, Elena sat in silence for a long time. Sophie waited patiently, not pushing. "I'm scared," Elena finally admitted. "Of course you are," Sophie said. "But you already did the hardest part. You played again. You faced the thing that terrified you most. What if I freeze up? What if I have another panic attack?" "Then you do," Sophie said simply. "And the people who matter will understand." "Elena, can I tell you something? I've been taking piano lessons for 3 years. My teacher is okay, but she's always telling me I need to be perfect. Every mistake is treated like a failure. Last night, watching you play, I finally understood what I've been missing. You weren't trying to be perfect. You were trying to be honest. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I've been thinking about quitting. The lessons, the practice, all of it. It stopped being fun years ago. But watching you last night, I remembered why I started. I want to make music that means something. Like you did. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She'd been so focused on her own pain and fear that she hadn't considered how her story might affect others. Sophie wasn't the only one. The comments on the video were full of people sharing their own stories of loss, failure, and fear of trying again. I looked up your mother, Sophie said softly. Maria Winters. She was a piano teacher. I read some interviews with her students. They all said the same thing. That she taught them music wasn't about being the best. It was about being brave enough to share yourself. Elena started crying. She'd avoided thinking about her mother for so long. The grief was too overwhelming. But Sophie was right. Her mother had always said that. Music is bravery. Music is vulnerability. Music is showing people your heart and trusting them not to break it. Over the next few days, Elena's life became surreal. Music journalists were writing articles about her disappearance and return. Some were sympathetic, talking about mental health and grief in the arts. Others were more critical, questioning why she'd hidden for so long. A famous music blogger wrote a piece titled, "The Pianist Who Chose Survival Over Fame," that went viral. It talked about how the classical music world had failed Elena, expecting her to perform hours after her mother's death, then abandoning her when she proved to be human. Old colleagues started reaching out. Some were genuine in their apologies and support. Others seemed more interested in being associated with her newfound viral fame. Elena learned quickly to tell the difference. Rita sent a long text message apologizing for everything she'd said and done. Elena read it several times. The apology seemed real, full of shame and regret. Elena wrote back simply, "Thank you. I forgive you." It felt good to let it go. Mrs. Palmer called and apologized too, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have been kinder," she said. "I should have seen you were struggling." "I'm so sorry." Mrs. Ashford, however, never apologized. Instead, her lawyer sent Elena a letter offering a substantial payment in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. Elena tore it up. She didn't want money. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted to move forward. 3 weeks after the gala, Elena sat in her apartment with Robert Castellano, discussing the concert he'd proposed. He'd brought sheet music and ideas, but mostly he just listened to what she wanted. "I want to dedicate it to my mother," Elena said. "Everything I play will be pieces she loved, pieces we shared together." Robert nodded, his eyes kind. "That's beautiful. And Elena, if at any point you need to stop, if it becomes too much, you stop. No judgment, no penalties. Just stop." Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do it." As Robert left, promising to send her the details, Elena walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about her mother, about 5 years of hiding, about that moment at the piano when her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. She was still scared, terrified actually, but she was also ready to play again, ready to face the world, ready to let music back into her life with all the pain and beauty that came with it. The concert was set for 2 months away. Elena had work to do. The 2 months leading up to the concert were the hardest and most healing of Elena's life. She had to relearn how to practice, how to sit at a piano for hours without the weight of trauma crushing her chest. Some days were better than others. She'd wake up determined, sit at the small keyboard she'd bought for her apartment, and play for hours. Other days she'd sit down and immediately feel her mother's absence so strongly that she couldn't continue. On those days she'd let herself cry and try again the next day. Sophie visited often, bringing groceries and company. She'd sit on the couch doing homework while Elena practiced, saying that hearing her play helped her concentrate. Elena suspected Sophie just wanted to make sure she wasn't alone. "How's your piano teacher working out?" Elena asked one afternoon during a break. Sophie smiled. "I quit, actually. I'm saving money to study music properly when I finish school. I want to do it right, not just learn to be technically perfect." "What will you do for money?" "I got a job at a bookstore. It pays better than the Manor anyway." Sophie paused. Mrs. Ashford had to let half the staff go. The scandal hurt her social standing. Some of her wealthy friends dropped her completely. Elena felt a pang of guilt, but Sophie shook her head. Don't. She did that to herself. The way she treated people had nothing to do with you. You just held up a mirror. One evening, Elena received an unexpected visitor. She opened her door to find Vincent Cross standing there looking nervous and holding a small plant. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, he said quickly, but I wanted to apologize in person, not just in a video. May I come in? Elena hesitated, then stepped aside. Vincent entered awkwardly, placing the plant on her small table. I've been in therapy, he said without preamble, dealing with some things. My therapist suggested I make amends to people I've hurt, but this isn't just about that. I genuinely am sorry for how I treated you, not just at the manor, but the whole attitude I had, like I was better than everyone else. He sat down when Elena gestured to a chair. I started teaching, Vincent continued. Kids from low-income families. I'm not charging them anything. And Elena, I'm terrible at it. I've spent my whole life playing piano, but I never learned how to share the love of it. I only knew how to show off. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked, not unkindly. Because you helped me realize I'd lost my way, and I wanted you to know that your impact that night went beyond just one viral video. You changed how I see music, how I see myself. He stood to leave. I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted you to know that. And to say I hope your concert is everything you want it to be. After he left, Elena looked at the plant. It was a small peace lily. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. People could change. Even Vincent Cross. The week before the concert, Robert invited Elena to see the venue. It was a small historic hall with old wooden floors and incredible acoustics. Nothing like the massive stages she'd performed on before. It felt intimate and safe. 68 people, Robert said, showing her the seating. Musicians, music teachers, some students. A few critics, but only the kind ones. He smiled. And there will be people from your past life here too. People who want to support you. Elena's stomach flipped. Who? You'll see. Good surprises, I promise. The night before the concert, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mother's face clear in her mind. She remembered her mother's last words to her, spoken just before she left for that fateful Carnegie Hall performance. Remember, sweetheart, music is just organized air. It can't hurt you. It's what you do with it that matters. At the time, Elena hadn't understood. Now she did. Music hadn't betrayed her that night. Her own fear had, and the cruel expectations of an industry that valued profit over people. The day of the concert arrived. Sophie helped Elena get ready, doing her hair and making sure she ate something. You're going to be amazing, Sophie kept saying. What if I'm not? Elena asked, staring at herself in the mirror. Then you'll be human, Sophie said simply. And that's enough. Elena arrived at the venue 2 hours early. She needed time alone with the piano to get comfortable, to breathe. Robert had left her a note on the bench. This piano is yours tonight. Make it sing. She sat down and played through some warm-ups, then pieces from her program. Her hands felt good, strong, ready. As the audience began arriving, Elena peeked out from backstage. She saw Sophie in the third row, beaming with pride. Robert was greeting people at the door. And then Elena saw faces she recognized from her past life. Former teachers, musicians she'd performed with. All of them smiling, looking genuinely happy to see her return. In the back row, trying to be inconspicuous, sat Rita and Mrs. Palmer from the manor. They'd both dressed up looking nervous and hopeful. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. They'd come. Robert walked onto the small stage to introduce her. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is about more than music. It's about resilience. It's about a woman who lost everything and found her way back. Not to fame, but to herself. Please welcome Elena Winters. The applause was warm and encouraging. Elena walked out and her legs felt steadier than she'd expected. She sat at the piano and looked at the audience. These weren't strangers judging her. These were people who cared about music, about art, about truth. Thank you all for coming, Elena said, her voice soft but clear. 5 years ago, I lost my mother and I lost myself. Tonight, I dedicate this performance to her memory and to everyone who has ever felt broken and wondered if they could be whole again. She began with Chopin's Nocturne, the same one she'd played at the manor. But this time she wasn't playing through tears of panic. She was playing through tears of release. The music flowed from her like a river that had finally found its path again. She moved through her program, each piece a memory, a tribute, a healing. Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Schubert, music her mother had loved, music they'd shared. The audience was completely silent, completely present. For the final piece, Elena chose something different. She'd written it herself over the past 2 months, working through her grief and hope in notes and chords. It was simple, not technically flashy, but it was honest. It was her story in music form. When she finished, the silence lasted several heartbeats. Then the audience rose in a standing ovation. But it wasn't the kind of applause she remembered from her old life, the polite appreciation of impressed critics. This was different. People were crying. They were hugging each other. They looked transformed. Sophie was sobbing openly. Rita and Mrs. Palmer had their arms around each other, both weeping. Even Robert had tears streaming down his face. Elena stood and bowed, feeling lighter than she had in years. She wasn't performing to be famous anymore. She wasn't playing to prove anything. She was simply sharing something beautiful because she could. After the concert, people lined up to speak with her, not to ask for autographs or selfies, but to share their own stories. A woman told her about losing her husband. A young man spoke about his battle with depression. A teacher talked about almost giving up on her students. They all said the same thing. Her music had reminded them that it was possible to keep going. Sophie hugged her tightly. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Rita and Mrs. Palmer approached nervously. We don't deserve to be here, Rita said, her voice shaking. But we needed you to know how sorry we are, and how grateful we are that you showed us what real strength looks like. Elena hugged them both. We all did what we could with what we knew. I forgive you. I forgive everyone. A month later, Elena was sitting in her new apartment, slightly bigger than the last one, with a real piano in the living room. She was teaching 5 students now, including Sophie. She performed occasionally at small venues, always on her own terms, always for the love of it. The viral fame had faded, replaced by something better. A quiet life filled with music and meaning. She'd been offered bigger concerts, television appearances, record deals. She'd turned them all down. She didn't need that anymore. On her piano sat a framed photo of her mother, and beside it a note from Sophie. Thank you for showing me that falling down isn't the end of the story. You taught me more through your struggles than most people learn in a lifetime. Elena smiled, her fingers moving across the keys in a gentle improvisation. Outside her window, the city moved at its usual frantic pace. But in her small apartment, there was peace. She'd been a star once, then a maid, and now she was simply Elena. A woman who played piano because it made the world a little more beautiful. A woman who'd learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what truly matters. And what mattered, she now knew, wasn't the applause or the fame or the recognition. It was the music itself, the connection, the truth, the courage to be vulnerable, and the grace to keep going. Elena played into the evening, the notes drifting out her window and into the world, a quiet gift from someone who'd finally come home to herself.